Good afternoon. My name is Adviti Naik, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Qatar Biomedical Research Institute. And it is with great pleasure that I welcome you to this panel discussion today on women in science within our series of talks for early career researchers. A couple of housekeeping rules before we begin. The microphone is muted, but we encourage you all to post your questions during the talk in the Q&A tab and not the chat tab. If you're using a mobile device, you will find the Q&A tab by clicking on the circle with 3 dots as shown here. Please direct these questions to all the panelists to make sure that your questions are visible to us. The webinar will also be recorded and a link to it will be shared with you. So to commemorate the International Day of Women in Science that was held on the 11th of February, today we're about to listen to the inspirational journey of 3 renowned women in science, their victories and challenges, and their advice to aspiring scientists. With this, I would like to welcome our distinguished panelists of female scientists who have truly shattered glass ceilings, led high-impact research in their respective fields, been recognized for their achievements, held leadership positions, inspired many of us who have had the chance to know them. Our first panelist, Dr. Hiltrud Brauch, has been a professor and senior investigator in breast cancer susceptibility and pharmacogenomics at the Margaret Fisher Bosch Institute of Clinical Pharmacology in Stuttgart, Germany. She received her initial training and PhD in Germany, followed by postdoctoral training at the National Cancer Institute in the US. She has held several positions at the German Cancer Research Center in Heidelberg, the Technical University in Munich, the University Hospital in Hamburg, and at the Institute of Clinical Pharmacology in Stuttgart, where until recently she held the position of deputy director and now serves as a scientific advisor. Through her work, she has established a reputation in the field of breast cancer susceptibility, prognosis, and pharmacogenomics, particularly in guiding endocrine treatments in breast cancer. Next, we have Dr. Scientist and Joint Associate Professor at the Qatar Computing Research Institute. She received her PhD in France and worked as a postdoc at the University of Washington and at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center in the US. She also spent 2 years as a data theory scientist at the University of Leiden in the Netherlands and held associate professor positions in biostatistics and bioinformatics at the University of Tennessee and at the Virginia Medical School in the US. And then she moved to Qatar to QCRI to work on statistical machine learning and bioinformatics. And lastly, we have our very own Dr. Alexandra Butler, who is a principal investigator at the Diabetes Research Center at the Qatar Biomedical Research Institute. She obtained her MBBS degree and postgrad training in the UK, and undertook a residency in pathology at the Mayo Clinic in the US. She began her training at the University of Southern California and subsequently at the University of California, LA, where she served as a professor of medicine and endocrinology for 16 years. Dr. Alexandra's research has shed immense light on the pancreatic islet biology in relation to type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Thank you so much to all you 3 ladies here for joining us today for this panel discussion. So let me begin by posing to you a couple of questions, and we will address each of our panelists to share their thoughts on these questions. And then we'll spend the last couple of minutes of the webinar taking some questions from the audience. So each of you come from slightly different fields within the science umbrella, from pure science to computational science and medical science. From your experience, what is it like to be a woman in science, and what are some of the unique aspects that we can have your thoughts, Dr. Hiltrud? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Adviti, for this nice invitation and inviting me to this webinar today, which is a great experience for me. So first of all, I would like to stress that probably it's a privilege for both women and men to work in science. And probably we are there because we were lucky that our talents have been spotted by parents and teachers And throughout our training, we had mentors that supported us, not only in pointing out the importance of making progress, but also pointing out that it's worthwhile to go the extra mile, to go for an education, to go for progress, to go for a degree, and to compete. But when you, and it's really great to be part of that community, and also to be, to share experiences with researchers around the globe. So this is a privilege. But coming back to your question, what is it all about to be a woman in science? And that may be true for all the different topics or areas we work in, is that we have to be aware that this is a very, very competitive area with almost, I felt, not really set rules. So while I made the experience that even in my generation, it was not so much the question of having had an opportunity to participate. It is rather the challenge to be admitted to competition. Once you have your degrees, and once you compete for positions, for a job, and also for authority within a department or within a university. So that may take us by surprise sometime during our careers, that at the race for the top, we may fall behind. And we have to be aware of that and ask ourselves, why is that? And I believe it is our nature as women that we do not make so much fuss about ourselves. We go right to the top of a question, we focus, we want to solve problems, we are empathetic, and we have the ability to compromise. And while all of this is great capacity and you know, great attributes, these are not the preferred attributes when you have to operate in a strategically oriented environment. And this is what we have to learn to deal with throughout our careers, because it's not just about jobs, it's about responsibilities, and in the end about power. So I think being a woman in academia or in science, that has taught me that it's not only about my capabilities within the science area, but within this political environment I have to work in to succeed and be successful.
Thank you, Dr. Hiltrud. What are your thoughts, Dr. Halima?
Thank you, Adviti, and I'm very pleased and honored to be part of this panel with these two, amazing women. So thank you very much for giving me this chance to share with you my experience coming from the southern of Mediterranean country. So my experience was a little bit a mixture of positive and a little bit negative experience in this. So originally, I was supported by a woman, my mother. So my mother was always a woman who, even though she didn't go to school, she was a housewife, but her dream she was trying to implement her dream in us, in her daughter. So I was probably the youngest one of her daughter, and she just pushed me to go as far as I can. That was amazing for me. The second part of the advantage I got, it's also from a man. So the person I owe what I am right now, they are all male. So it was my math teacher, because at that time I was thinking about having different path, maybe biology, maybe economic, but he was the one who put me on the right track, because he saw in me probably the potential. Then further, when I had to travel abroad, my mom was a little bit reluctant because being a woman coming from a different culture, you know, they are protective. But my father gave me the green light to go far away, even though it was a little bit challenging for me. And then back there, the person who helped me and pushed me, they are my PhD advisor in France, my mentor in UW, University of Tennessee when I was a junior faculty member. So all of those are male, and I was embraced. I was very, very happy that I was always embraced as a woman in a culture that is dominant. Usually when you are doing mathematics, etc., it's dominant by male. The second thing that was helpful to me in my experience, and this will depend from one person to another person, is the fact that I was having this drive of being an adventurer. So nothing was stopping me. I was a little bit dreamer, and nothing was difficult for me. So anything that come to my path, and this is really the truth, anything that's come to my path, even though if it is hard, I always said yes. So, for example, when I was in France, all my classmates, when they are done with their PhD program, they all, you know, they bought a car and they went back to their homeland. This is the end of the dream. I was the only one in my section who decided to go to the US when I had the opportunity coming to me. Also, when I went back to Leiden, that was the same experience. So overall, you know, everything depends on, you know, the success or the drive will depend on different things. So one is from family and culture, if they are encouraging the woman to be there. Second, from the environment where you are, you know, you're a teacher, your lab. And the third is your personality. So it depends on the person. If you have this courage to go and face the world, yes, you can succeed. And last, as my colleague Gertrude very well explained, also there is some very important element that come to this. Soup, this ingredient is the flexibility, also the compromise. So being a woman, it means most of the time, probably it's equivalent to being a mother. So you will have probably, you know, kids, etc., etc. So are you willing to compromise? And here it comes to the strength of a woman, which is a woman is always known to be a multitask. A man, he thinks and do one thing one by one. The woman can cook, can do research, can pick up kids from school, etc. So probably I can informally adjust a little bit. I hope that I answered this question from my own experience.
Thank you, Dr. Halima. I think those are really great advice of having great mentors, but also being a dreamer ourselves. And now I'd like to address this to Dr. Alexandra.
Hi, good afternoon. And Dr. Adviti, thank you so much for this invitation. It really is a privilege to be here with you today and to be amongst such esteemed colleagues who we all have our own unique perspective on and our own experiences on this. I would actually echo Dr. Hildred's thoughts that being in science is a privilege. It's truly a privilege, but it's also a challenge. And that because it's not a 9-to-5 occupation, and that's the same for men and women. So that's no different. But I think that the issues that women face, there are some particular issues that they face relative to men. And, you know, having given this a little thought, I think a lot of women feel that it's difficult for them to have a place at the table in science. I think a lot of women have this imposter syndrome, thinking that they don't believe that they're good enough to be there. And they think that at some point down the line, somebody's going to find it out. Somebody's going to find out that they are frauds, when this is just not the case. But you have to ask yourself, where does that come from? Because that is a situation that, whilst it's not limited to women, is preponderance of women suffer from this. And I think it goes back to the educational systems through which girls and boys are brought up, particularly when it's coeducational, and particularly when they reach their teenage years. And the boys tend to be testosteronized and louder and, you know, more bombastic. And the girls tend to shy away from that. And therefore, they become less inclined to ask questions, to be involved in discussions. And I think that particularly relates to STEM subjects, science, technology, math. And so they tend to avoid those situations, which is a terrible shame. And I think our duty as a culture is to change that, and it's to support girls and show them that they are absolutely as capable and should follow whatever their passions are. And if you give me just, if I may digress just for a second here, because I think this is a point that illustrates the problem quite nicely. I recently read the memoir of Barack Obama. It's called A Promised Land, and it's about his years in the White House. And I'll preface this by saying that I admire Barack Obama greatly. I think he was a great statesman, a wonderful human being, but also a very inclusive and progressive president, in that he included race, gender, sexual orientation. There were people he surrounded himself, and he didn't exclude anyone from the table. And he had the largest number of women in his cabinet of any president prior to him. So one day, when one of the women cabinet members came to him and said, "President, we have a problem. The women are very unhappy. They don't feel like they're being listened to. They feel like they're being sidelined and talked over, and they're upset. You know, some have been driven to tears." He was shocked. He had no idea. And so he got together with the women, he heard their grievances, he talked to them about it, and then he took all this back to the men in the cabinet. And they were just aghast. They said, "No, yeah, how is this even possible? We just behave the way we always behave." But I think that's the root of the issue, that the way locker room men may behave does not suit the temperaments of women. And so I think as an institution, those things have to be changed. And the only way that can be changed is through education. And I would say re-education and continuing education, because I don't think there is necessarily a deliberate negative effect on women, but I don't think men often realize what the effect they're having is on women. And so I think that's an important issue as a culture that we need to change. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Alexandra, and thank you for also highlighting this unconscious bias that sometimes is not intended, but something that institutions and all of us need more awareness about. Okay, the next point that I'd like to discuss. So as you all mentioned, science is challenging irrespective of gender. But what are some of the challenges that you have faced, particularly as a female scientist? And I'd like to ask Dr. Halima for her thoughts first, please.
Thank you, Adviti. For one of the main, probably challenging point that that I always raised and I always repeated, and that was clearly stated in one of my past interviews at the Authority magazine in November 2020, is the lack. For example, when women attend, for example, there is a lack of participation of women in scientific activity like workshop, invited speaker, that is clearly apparent. So whenever there is any conference, activity, etc., there is always a lack of a woman by comparison to the man. The second point that I can emphasize about is also this the feeling of, it's not the lack of courage, but there is some kind of intimidation probably. Maybe it's coming from a woman, you know, upbringing, or just feeling when you attend, for example, we are in the middle of a discussion, scientific discussion, or a meeting, etc., management meeting or scientific meeting, and then most of the time, and I had the experience when I was a junior, most of the time you have the right answer to a specific question, scientific questions specifically, and maybe Adviti, you may agree with me on that, and the students also, but there is something that is always stopping you from that, because either you are shy, or maybe you don't have the confidence, enough confidence on you to speak out. So this is my advice. So this, particularly to address this particular point, this challenge that I can see very, very important is we have always to speak up our mind, to talk, to discuss, no matter what, or no matter who is in the room. And this is really, it has been also stated actually just recently, 2 years ago, in one of those meetings, it's called Grace Harper, it's a woman meeting, I forget the name. And this is something very useful to repeat, to especially to those young students or young junior faculty member. Always try to speak up your mind, because most of the time what your answer is correct. It just, there is some kind of lack of force that or lack of confidence that is always linked to us as a woman. So this is probably one of the most important things that I can talk about and emphasize, and they can talk later about it, so I can give the time to my colleague.
Thank you, Dr. Halima. And I think that's a great point, that we need to have that self-confidence to be able to prove to not just ourselves, but even others around us, that we can do whatever it is, irrespective of gender. What about you, Dr. Alexandra? What are some of the unique challenges that you feel like you've personally faced as a female scientist?
Okay, I'm not going to say unique, but I'm going to say the biggest challenge I faced is trying to, and this was alluded to by our panelists in the last question, is the multitasking and the juggling of all the disparate responsibilities that fall upon us. So we have a job, a career that is 100%, but we also have parenting duties that also require 100% of us. And we're constantly pulled in multiple directions and asked to juggle that, which is exhausting. And it's also, I think, undoubtedly, for many years, I had the feeling that I was cutting corners in both. So I wasn't doing anything as well as I could do it because I didn't have the time. And so that's a very dispiriting feeling, to feel like you're constantly just trying to get through the day or the week, rather than focus and do your very best at your work. I think that is particularly an issue, perhaps in the US versus perhaps the Middle East. I don't know about Europe. I think Halima can maybe comment, where the leave is so limited. I mean, you get 3 weeks vacation a year. There is no family leave. I was asked to use my vacation leave for maternity leave because there was none at the time. What do you do? And at the time, I didn't have the resources to be able to hire a full-time nanny, so you're juggling running to daycare and all those things. I think that, as I say, becomes very exhausting. That has to be definitely the biggest challenge that we as women face. I think the other thing is that the workplace and the scientific workplace can be a very cutthroat arena, and it shouldn't be, but it is. And I think a lot of women who are naturally not inclined towards that type of behavior can find that very disturbing. And yes, they can shy away from the whole politicization of the workplace. So I personally think that it's our responsibility to make sure that that's not the case within the sphere that we have control of, and to make an effort to model better behavior. So with that, I'll pass it on to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Alexandra. I totally agree. Sometimes as women, we are juggling so many balls, and we sometimes might drop a couple, but I think it's important to know that it's okay to do so, and for our mental health. What are some of the challenging issues that you have faced as a female scientist?
Yes, I can relate to everything what has been said so far. And I would like to hook in right to the last comments and dwell on a little bit on what has been raised before, the so-called subconscious male bias. And some of the challenges I faced, or at least I memorize as turning point in my awareness of things, is that this subconscious bias is easily turning into a bias and even used as an instrument against you. And that may relate to something Dr. Alexandra has referred to in her comments, that when it comes to the competitive part for jobs or for leading positions or within your department or university, to move up actually the professional ladder, that can be rather disturbing. And for me, an eye-opener was actually being in a competition where I thought I had the scientific qualifications to compete with all the other applicants. When I discovered, and this is frequently the case but not talked about, that this is all setups and fake competitions, because the result is already clear in the beginning. Everybody knows that, except you don't. So this is something to be very much aware of. And I learned this right in a situation where being received at that university, having the small talks, being treated friendly, you don't expect any of any aggression. But when it comes to the official or the let's say the closed shop interview with a dozen of other people, the lead dog of the university may out of the sudden say, how come that you are here? How come that nobody stopped you from being here? And that is not meant so much, or I figured out in reflecting later, that was not a message to me. That was a message to the others at the table. Because from that moment on, it was clear, you guys have to get her out of here. And that is rather disturbing, because no matter what you do, what you say, you can't win that. And that has been one of the eye-openers for me, that I have actually decided I don't want to participate in my own defeat. So why should I actually put myself into that situation where I participate in fake interviews and then have to admit I don't belong there because everybody's telling me. And this is something I think is rather disturbing, and I don't think that my experience is a unique one. You may think so in that moment, but actually can happen to men also. But I think it's easier done to women, because as we may be more shy as has been pointed out before. We prefer to think before we say something. That is already a mistake or a disadvantage, let's put it this way. And this is in being friendly, cautious, rational, you may have already lost the game before it even started. So this is something to be aware of, that you come into situations where you may not be wanted, but you still have to stand up saying, I am here and you deal with it, not only me. So that's something from my experience.
Thank you, Dr. Hiltrud, for sharing that. And I think it resonates with a lot of women here today listening. And I think the next discussion, what you've said on how can this be improved? So the representation of women at the level of university education has tremendously increased over the past decades. And we as scientists, we like to look at numbers to believe things. And according to stats, only about 30% of the global STEM workforce is female. So what are some of the examples of positive transformation that you have experienced at institutions that you worked at towards promoting women in science to fix this leaky pipeline? Or if you have any suggestions that you think that may make the environment more lucrative for women. And if I can ask Dr. Alexandra to address this first, please.
Sure. So I think one of the things, and this is true for men and women, to be honest, is that there needs to be mentors and role models. And particularly for women, I would argue that whilst they don't need to be limited to women role models, as is the case for Dr. Halima, for instance, there needs to be some women involved, hopefully. And that was very difficult in past generations, when there just weren't any women in those positions. So how you didn't have that. And I have to, take my hat off to those women who were very courageous at that time and did what they did without any of that. But these days we are much more fortunate in that, yes, there are women, and I think it's important as a young scientist to seek them out and to understand what their experience is and to hopefully learn from that. So I would definitely advise young scientists that that is something they can do to help themselves. I think there also needs to be greater flexibility in the workplace. And again, this may be from my personal experience, but in the past, when I was younger and with young children, there was no flexibility. There was no part-time. There was no way. It was either all or nothing. And I think that is very destructive. And it's actually destructive as a society, because it means that so many women get lost and they leave the workplace and they never come back. And I think that the loss of their input, their education, their abilities is massive for a society. So there have to be structural ways within the organization to allow women to take the time that they need, but to keep them and to allow them to return when they're ready. So thank you.
What about you, Dr. Hiltrud? What are your thoughts or advice regarding changes that are needed?
Well, I think changes have been made throughout the past years, and that is very good. So from the experience of Dr. Alexandra, I would say that today's women have more opportunities or flexibility, because their issues are now, when it comes to more balanced work-family life, that this has made it into the discussions, and women are given more rights to take maternity leave. in Europe or in Germany, it's even paternity leave is possible. But
Yes.
family issue is being discussed. And there is even, it has made it into code of conduct officially. So I think it probably offers more opportunities to combine a scientific job with a family. But still, that is not all to it. The question is whether this also allows to have a career, which is two different things. One of it is to have a job in science, and the other is, are you able to progress and to develop your career? And I even see as a grant reviewer on the international level, I even see that today reviewers are asked to allow for in the CV to have gaps for whatever reason, raising children and so forth, turn to your family, come back to your profession or to your job. But I think that is only a formal thing that institutions, societies, governments can take care of. But of course, that's only part of the problem. It's good that we have that, but we have to turn to further discuss these issues and speak out loud, and to raise an awareness that women making a career because they want it, because they have the capability to do so, cannot stop at the level whether they are allowed or not. So we have to raise that awareness that they have to be given the opportunity to compete throughout their careers. And we only can do that by speaking about it and by addressing it and by not stopping to ask that, to put that into the center. And I agree absolutely with how can a society, how can countries get not take advantage of 50% of their capacity. So what is behind that not to allow that? So we have to dig out those problems, which may be manifold, but so while we are progressing, while we are improving, the problems are not solved.
Thank you, Dr. Hiltrud. I think what you've said is right. Privileged in this time that a lot of progress has been made in terms of the legalities of gender equality and representation and inclusion, but we have to talk about again these unconscious biases that we don't have laws to handle. These only come from raising awareness in the society and at workplaces. What about you, Dr. Halima? What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, it's a dilemma. That's the key word. Why? Because as my colleague explained, both Altrud and Alexandra, they explained very well that okay, there is government institution, they are who are putting law and the criteria for equal opportunity for male and woman. For example, in US, when you are applying for a job, there is what is called equal opportunity in the US. So it means that there is some percentage for minority and for women, etc., and disability. So by law, there are things that are there to protect women. We are not in a war, it's just the key word, protect women. When I was in Europe, in Holland particularly, it's one of the country that I admire very well, like the Northeast country. They have some very advanced also system for women. So as my colleague specified, there was at that time an implementation of fatherhood. So when the woman has she gives birth, not only her, she will have time off for motherhood, but also the father will take time off so that the woman go back to work. So this is working perfectly. This is very nice. The problem is the key word is leadership. So here, when it is when you are just talking about having opportunity to work, to excel, yeah, there is no problem. But when there is an opportunity, when you're looking for a leadership to lead, to be a group leader, and women, as my colleague said, we have the same brain, same chromosome, same thing. So we are scientifically producing, the same idea as male. But the problem that is facing us is when you are dealing with leadership, when you need time to focus, to build a group, to create a group, this is where you have some problem, because you need to we need to focus. So at that time, how can we do that if you are other job also to do? Like there is one proverb that says, behind every successful man, a great woman. But I don't see the opposite, unfortunately, especially in the in the southern part of the globe. Maybe in Europe, yes. And this is where we need to push for. We need to switch a little bit, or to work on use a Bayesian model to push for a new proverb that say, behind every successful woman there is a great man. It means, are we ready? Are we at the level of having a woman leading a project, etc., while a male can support her at home with kids, etc. And particularly, I want to add something probably to answer also what Alexandria said. I had the chance when I was in the US at the University of Virginia to give a birth with a C-section. And I was just puzzled that I was required to go back to work after 2 weeks. And the C-section, it's a surgery, and there is pain, and there is medication that comes with it. But 2 weeks after, I had to be back to work. So I did exactly what she said. I had to take leave of absence, because my annual leave was 2 weeks only. So I have to take unpaid leave to be able to have some rest and then go back to work. And this is where I can point out a little bit on something very nice. Being in the Middle East, particularly in Qatar, we have this privilege as a woman, as a mother, to have access to days to rest before going to work, to have access to nannies, etc., by comparison to other countries. And the last thing that I want, because I have many ideas, but I don't want to take too much from your time. The last thing that I want also to add is that at this recently, I have seen an increase of the number of graduate women, graduate female, the number, just giving you an example from my experience in teaching at HBKU and in other university. In my class, there is always a dominant number of a woman by comparison to male, and they are very smart, they are very focused. So this shows that there is a driving force behind a woman to be successful, but just we have to we need some leadership, either from a female or from the environment, to push the woman to go from successful to leadership. That's the most important part that I want to add.
Thank you, Dr. Halima. I think that's a great message, that it needs to be a collective effort right from the leadership to the society, to the family, partners, colleagues, peers. It's a collective effort that drives this change in thinking. So our last point for discussion is, what is your girls and women aspiring careers in science? If we can just keep it for 1 minute each. And I would ask Dr. Alexandra to talk first, please.
Thank you. So first of all, I think girls and women should be encouraged to pursue whatever is their passion. And I think there's also an onus on girls to be realistic and to ask themselves the really hard questions of first of all, what do they want? But secondly, what are they willing to sacrifice to get there? And so I'm a firm believer that women can have it all, but just maybe not all at the same time. And so that we have perhaps a more convoluted path when compared to men. So things I would say to girls: build a network, be open to opportunity. I mean, we may have one idea in our minds, this is what we want, but don't miss out on all those opportunities that may come your way. Be adaptable. I think this is the biggest thing in modern society. You know, you build up a skill set, but you have to be able to adapt it to as the workplace changes. Be positive, you know, develop a can-do spirit. You know, don't take people your problems. If you're going to have an issue, take your problem, but take solutions as well, because this is what people need to hear from you. But the final point, and the thing I think is so important, is support one another. Be kind to one another. Be generous with your knowledge, your time, not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because you never know when you may need that help from someone else in the future. So.
Great advice, Dr. Alexandra, being kind and positive. What about you, Dr. Hiltrud? What is your advice to aspiring scientists?
Yes, actually, I agree with that. Be kind, be positive, adapt to your environment, build networks, very important, and be aware of, I think once you have gone through your education and you enter the professional life, get aware that this is more than about your talents and your capabilities in your subject and your scientific talent. So be aware of your environment. Maybe also change your environment once in a while. Get as much knowledge and sample as much as it's of experience as you can by changing your working place. Maybe not only within the country, but go outside the country. Sample all of that. Look at the system. And also yourself, of course, from the outside. And that may kind of shape the picture in a wider sense. But be aware of that you are in a very competitive environment, which you want to survive with all of your positive attitude. You want to take it all, as it has been said, not at the same time, but progressively. And you can do it as a woman, just as a man. You just have to be aware of at which time point you have to pull which trigger.
Thank you, Dr. Hiltrud. I think that's a great point of enriching our own experiences to know what we're really capable of. What about you, Dr. Halima? What is your advice to young scientists?
My advice is very, very simple. So the keyword or the keyword that I can put clear is enjoyment and being passionate. So if you enjoy what you are doing, for example, if you enjoy doing mathematics or computer science or biology, if you are passionate about it, for sure you will be successful. That's exactly what I was, from my experience. No matter what, if I tell you about my my path, all the difficulties that I have now, it looks very nice as a story. After 30 years being outside of, I was born in Morocco and I went to France, to US. I mean, US big. So after that to Europe, from Europe to Qatar, and we don't know what will happen next, maybe. So, but, and the difficulties, it was something that I face every day in different direction. But if you are passionate about what you want to do or what you are doing, if you enjoy what you are doing, believe me, you will smile and you will have the courage and the power to open the door by yourself. You will resist. So this is exactly my advice. And each person will have a different experience and different drive. But if you like what you are doing, you will find a way. That's exactly what I want to stress on.
Thank you, Dr. Halima. I think that's also such a great message of passion. I think sometimes in the rut, we forget the bigger picture on why we chose this career path.
Exactly.
and remembering why this career is important, and remembering that passion is I think something that's so important for that drive. Thank you so much to all three of you and all your personal experiences. Let's move on and look over some of the questions from the audience. I'd also like to remind the audience to post your questions in the Q&A tab and not the chat tab. And we will try to address as many questions as we can in the remaining 10 minutes. So the first question we have today is, what is your advice to manage both career and private life, and how do we manage both? And if I can ask Dr. Halima to address this, please.
It's not very simple, but yeah, it's very straightforward. You have to be well organized. So as I said, we are multitask. So one brain can think about something that you are doing during the day about scientific question, but the other brain, while you are cooking, you are thinking about it. So you have to be organized. Either having a husband, having kids, having a family, having many things to do, doing grocery by yourself. So I'm just talking from my experience. You need to be very well organized, and you can do it. The day has 24 hours, so we have time to sleep. That's for sure, to rest. But during the half of the day, if you are organized, you can do it. So managing your time, being organized is the key to that.
Thank you, Dr. Halima. Can we have the next question, please? Okay, how should a woman in science deal with her biases so it doesn't affect her professional decisions, and maybe I would add even professional relations? Can I ask Dr. Hiltrud to address this, please?
Yes, I think actually this is a great question, because it's a huge challenge to experience the biases and then struggle with them. But I think before you can come to decisions or even express any discomfort or problem, it is very important that you reflect on it yourself. You understand what makes you uneasy. You understand what this bias is about. Is it a real bias, or do I just perceive it as a bias? Do I feel unhappy because I want to feel unhappy, or is it real? So that very much actually in the first place is an issue of yourself, even though it may affect you right away. But I think we have to be very careful to pull that argument, we are treated bad because we are women, because that is wearing off. So you probably will spend many months and many years to become aware of it and actually put it right for you. So I think whenever you address it in public, and any other person is the public you express it to, then you should do it in a non-emotional way. And in order to be capable for that, you need to know what you say, what you talk about. So this may not satisfy you at this point, because you already see this is a long process to engage in and to learn. And there is no upfront right now solution. But I think we need to be aware of the problems, how they affect us. That means we need to think first before we talk. And not everything we may perceive as a disadvantage has to do with a gender bias. But frequently it is, and they are true.
Thank you, Dr. Hiltrud. Can we have the next question, please? If you had the option to give advice to a younger version of yourself, what would that be? And I'd like Dr. Alexandra to please address this.
Thank you. This is a great question. It's making me smile. I would probably tell my younger self not to do it the way I did. And by that, I mean, a lot of decisions were made more passively than actively. And I think one of the things that is very important is to have your end goal in mind. Where do you want to be at the end of all this? It doesn't mean that you'll necessarily get there in a straight line, but and in fact, quite the opposite. It probably means you'll go convoluted turns and stops and starts along the way, but you have to know what you want. And I don't think my younger self really understood what I wanted at that time. And I think that, quite honestly, that takes some maturity to come to that point. But so I would tell my younger self to probably stop, think, and decide, and give that aspect a great deal more thought than I did at the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Alexandra. If we can have the next question, please. Why did you choose to become a scientist? Did you have a mentor that I lost the slides, but
I can take
anyways, yes, please, Dr. Halima.
That's a very good question. Yeah, we don't wake up in the morning and we decide to be a scientist. At least we want to, or we have this drive. Personally, my mother's side, they have the affinity, for example, in my case, to mathematics. So they were known to be good in mathematics. That was something that was a little bit helpful to me. Second thing, I had, as I explained at the beginning, my teacher, and this is where school can play a role, because also this is something that I missed to, I didn't mention earlier. In the past, probably by comparison to now, in the past, you know, when there is a time to direct at the middle school, high school, the girl to a path, to, you know, to a direction at the IB. For example, we always have the tendency, the boy, you will go to computer science, engineering, a girl, you go to humanity or management or business. This was probably something that was a little bit frequent in the past, but now things have changed. So this is something very important. And this go back to how you decide to be a scientist. So the help of my mentor at the middle school and high school was very useful. The most important part also that opened the door wide open to me is when I was a master student. As I told you, within the group of students who I was with in France, all of them, they just said, okay, we'll get our degree and we'll go back and we will teach, for example, at university or at institute. In my case, what was my angel, if I can repeat that, it was the one professor that who I meet in France. I was given a presentation as a PhD student, and then he found some affinity to what I'm doing, and then he invited me to visit him in the US, and this opened me the door wide to academia and to research, because I discovered a lot of things while I was in the US. That was the biggest gift in my life. So again, as a summary, if you have this, if you are passionate about things, if you have this drive inside you about taking a path in as a scientist, you feel that. If either you have it or you don't have it. But with that, if you find someone who will take your hand, either a mentor, advice, family, and push you toward that path, I think that will be so helpful. And this is where our role as a woman needs to be emphasized. For example, when I'm teaching, this is what I try always to give as an example while I'm teaching. Okay, as an example, if you need to do this as a student who will do research, always I'm putting research as a motive or as a driving word to my students, instead of just doing, okay, at the end of the year you will get your degree and whatever you do, it's your choice. I'm always pushing them toward that path. So yeah, that's probably my answer, and I hope I didn't take too much time.
Thank you, Dr. Halima, that was perfect. Can we take one last question? Okay, this is specifically addressed to Dr. Alexandra by the attendee. At what stage have you felt you outgrew the imposter syndrome, and any advice on outgrowing it?
Well, thank you for the question. I'd like to say it was early on, but that's actually not true. I would say mid-career, really. It took that long to get to that point, and that stage of maturity in some ways, a scientific as well as actual age maturity. Any advice on outgrowing it? You know what? The advice I have is to do the things that you dread the most, to make yourself do the things that are most uncomfortable for you. And for, by way of example, I would say, I did not like public speaking. It terrified me. I had to do it. I had to make myself do it. And when you do it and you're successful, that's where the growth starts. So that's the best advice I can offer on that one. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Alexandra. I think that's great advice to really move out of our times to progress. With that, in the interest of time, I'd like to conclude today's panel discussion by thanking you all, Dr. Hiltrud, Dr. Halima, and Dr. Alexandra, for sharing so beautifully and honestly your personal experiences. And I think it's really inspired and motivated a lot of us today. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And thank you all to the audience as well for joining in and for your participation. As always, if there are topics that you would like us to cover in future webinars that are related to career development in science, please feel free to send us an email. I'd also like to thank the wonderful technical team running the show behind the scenes, Dr. Salam, a fellow postdoc, and Ms. Reem and Mr. Omar from the QBRI Communications Office. And with that, I'd also like to announce our next webinar, which will be held on the 14th of and we will have the famous science communicator, Mr. Hashim Al-Khaili, speak on this. So stay tuned for this announcement as well on our social media channels. And also, if you missed any of our previous webinars, you can watch them on the HBKU YouTube channel. And with that, thank you again. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Stay safe, stay well, and stay inspired. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.